Emerson has been outside in wild landscapes with me for her whole life. And she is a highly sensitive person who has just incredible observation abilities. And so, I mean, I remember like when she was 9 months old, I was bow hunting elk with her in a backpack, and she was in the herds and she would make elk sounds. And, so she has, even before it's possible that she remembers, this is kind of like the background and part of her life. It's just such a deep pleasure to be with a person who sees so clearly.
Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life. And for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. I am Forrest Inslee, and in this episode we'll be talking to Joel Pontius, Associate Professor of Sustainability and Environmental Education at Goshen College. Joel shares with us how place-based formational experiences, especially encounters with the natural world, help people to become more attuned to their contexts and more aware of their unique role in caring for creation. He explains how this approach impacts not just his teaching, but also his ways of parenting. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Joel, thanks so much for being part of the podcast today. I wonder if you could tell our listeners about what it is you do day to day and how you've invested your life.
Sure. So currently I'm an associate professor of sustainability and environmental education at Goshen College in the Lake Michigan watershed. So currently I direct the sustainability studies major for Goshen College, and I've helped to build that program looking at just the intersection between environmental, social, and financial responsibility and how that affects the health of places and communities. I direct a program there called the Sustainability Leadership Semester. It's based at a nature center that Goshen College owns. It's about 2,000 acres of a nature preserve, and the students stay in an environmentally conscious eco-village for the fall semester. And that program is, first of all, a place-based program. So we do a lot of learning experiences in the local watershed. The preserve is in the headwaters of the Elkhart River watershed that flows to Lake Michigan. And in the beginning of the fall semester, we do an 8-day canoe trip where we actually paddle from the headwaters where they're going to live the rest of the semester down the Elkhart River to the St. Joseph River, and then all the way out to Lake Michigan. On that trip, we meet with all kinds of different people who are farmers, wildlife managers, people who are working with the fisheries, those who are running restaurants and small towns along our paddle. We meet with people from the University of Notre Dame who are doing ecological research along the banks of the river, a gravel pit operator who mines gravel for use in roadways, all sorts of different people. And the basic theme is how all of these community members think about sustainability, how they think about the environmental, social, and financial health of their own pursuits and what's happening in communities that's connected to them.
When you say a place-based program, what do you actually mean by that?
So what I mean is that the program is focused first on the place where the students are doing their activities. So many of the examples of the renewable energy field or even like factory farming operations, we are starting locally and trying to get on the ground within the local watershed so that students can, start with that experience in place, and then we kind of move out from there. So in their context, I try to provide experiences for the students where we're actually eating from the local nature preserve, foraging for wild plants, mushrooms, with plenty of supervision, of course, and also a lot of humility. We have to question ourselves too, especially with the dangerous things like wild mushrooms, or working with the sustainable farm that the college runs, taking care of chickens or goats or whatnot. And yeah, that route of focusing on that certain place, I think really helps students to experience their learning at a deeper level, at a more kind of like on the ground level. And then, from that place-based kind of experience, they can go elsewhere and transfer a lot of those lessons.
So in some ways, it sounds like you're trying to help them almost to create a relationship with the place, a relationship with the land, because you're exposing them to so many different angles and perspectives on place, some of them sensory, some of them more maybe academic. But in all cases, it sort of comes together to create this more holistic picture of this place. Is actually the aim of the program?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the aim.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of different activities that we do where students, directly are developing that relationship with a place. And many of the kind of strategies that I use as a teacher come from more of like the contemplative tradition. So, for example, I have the students do a sit spot experiment. So, for a month of the program, it's usually in mid-September through mid-October. Every single day, they walk to a certain place that they have selected and they sit there silently. So I ask the students not to take their phones, that if they want a sense of time, they can take a watch if they need that, and to approach, this everyday sitting experience and solitude and quietness experience as if they're trying to get to know a new friend. So, in that kind of relational sense, that at the beginning, with the first ask, sometimes the students are a little bit wary of, well, what do you mean? I've never done anything like that. It sounds a little bit odd. But then by the end of a whole month, the students are doing a creative project to kind of show some of those deeper lessons that they've learned, and typically do come back with, oh, wow, I learned how to be with myself in a new way. I learned that I can have a reciprocal kind of relationship, a conversation with a tree that happens over time. And that makes my internal landscape a little bit softer, a little bit more receptive, those kinds of ideas. So that's just one example of one of those strategies we use to develop a relationship with place.
Now, why do you think relationship is important? I'm not sure where these students are going. Are they generally all science students?
Yeah, so there are students from all the different majors. A lot of them are sustainability majors, which they might be more focused on communication. They might be more focused on education, but there is definitely an interest in natural history and the ecological sciences. We've had students go on to be film producers. We've had students go on to be, editors or writers. We've had students go on to work in the financial sector to do environmentally and socially conscious investing. We have had several students actually who are American Sign Language interpreting majors. And so what they're doing in the program is they're getting more of a handle, especially on those natural systems, and hoping to find a niche where they can help translate the natural world in a new way through their sign language interpreting.
Mm-hmm. So why does it make a difference? Or maybe I'll ask this: how do you hope it will make a difference for them to be engaging creation, engaging the place around them in a more relational way, in a way that probably is foreign to most of them when they start out in this learning process?
Yeah, I mean, here we are in this cultural moment where, humans, animals of the same species, are having almost an inability to connect with each other. In the United States, it's this kind of political gridlock where, it's hard for people to listen to someone who's different from them. If you take it at a place level, if we're having more of those conversations with the creation, with the natural world, with the watershed, all of a sudden, the other, which might be a yellow warbler, which might be a snapping turtle, which might be a chicken in the farmyard, expands quite a bit. So then this ability to have a conversation with a tree, I think, can actually translate in the ability to value the differences between ourselves and other humans. So one of the things that I hope for, and that I've definitely observed in my students, is that they have more courage to connect and develop relationships with those who are different from them. In the community development context, that makes a huge difference when there's the courage to sit down with a person who might have markedly different political ideology than you and be willing to listen and be willing to take that time.
So I got to know you primarily through your writing, through an essay that we republished for a different journal. But I read that essay and I realized I really needed to meet you. I needed to hear more about what was going on behind that. And so, while I don't usually do this in the podcast, have people read lots of stuff, I'm actually hoping that we can read a good part of your essay because I want listeners to hear that. And then I want that to be our springboard for some of the questions I have. So I wonder if you could read that first part and talk about the title of your essay, Hearts Like This.
Hearts like this. A red oak acorn crunches under my foot, and the sound ripples through the pre-dawn darkness on the forest path from the corner of the house. I stop in the woolen cold to listen. Starlight pulses through a few holes in the cloud cover in a way that embosses the thick arms of the oaks overhead. Just how many creatures have they fed over the generations in this place, and what kinds? A twig snaps. In the back of my belly, I feel the hollow thudding of hooves in the red maple swamp below. White-tailed deer do not usually flee very far in the dark if they haven't picked up human scent. The wind drifts up slope into my face, so I don't think they smelled me. I bump along the trail for a quarter mile and use a climbing tree stand to shimmy up the hard sides of a pignut hickory. 20 feet above the ground, I settle into stillness. Light seeps onto the lake before it crawls into the woods. A flock of geese speak at the edge of the cattail marsh. The squirrels wrangle whatever it is they're caching in the soil. I hear the yearling buck before I see him. His steps are of a different measured timbre than the squirrels. I watch him forage his way through the leaf litter for some time. He walks over the ridge and out of sight. I don't know why, but a few minutes later, he emerges in the same notch and walks a line right to me. He stops in a patch of frosted nettle to eat something. He's close. I have a solid rest. I want to make sure not to lose any meat to bruising from the copper bullet, so I settle the crosshairs where his brainstem meets his spinal column. I take a deep breath in, exhale fully, and hold. Focus. Squeeze. His body falls and he dies there on the ground. What exactly happens to all of us when we move from life to death? I want to give space and time for the transition, so I wait in the tree for an hour before I make the descent. When I reach the deer, I kneel down next to him for a while to say sorry and thanks. Then I shift my body around and lift his head to rest in my lap. I pay attention to the silence that I caused by taking his life.
Yeah, so much is going on in that. that first part of the essay. I guess I want to focus first on the line I felt was most poignant, which was just when you kneel down, you say sorry, you say thanks, and you put the buck's head in your lap. Can you tell me what's going on in there? I mean, it's so deep and powerful. I'm just wondering if you can expand a bit on what it is you were doing and why. Because that is not the stance of maybe what we assume to be a typical hunter.
Sure. Yeah, so there is a lot that's kind of embodied in this. I grew up in mostly the heartland in Indiana and in a evangelical kind of religious culture that really valued, I think, toxic forms of masculinity. And I have always been very close to the land. I mean, my first memory as a child, my first like real picture of something that happened in my life was when I was on a beach in Jamaica and I had a plastic cup and I caught a crab in this plastic cup. And I just sat there and just watched this crab and just watched it move. And so, being close to animals and to plants and to the more than human world has always been part of my life. But there was a process that I had to go through. I grew up hunting with my dad, and it was one of my favorite things. We mostly hunted for small game like rabbits. He grew up hunting with his dad, and the table fare was very important. His family was fairly poor, so the rabbits and the pheasants and the quail went along with a big, big garden that his dad, my gramps, grew. And so, I grew up loving those times with my dad, walking through the woods and helping to get rabbits. I mean, I was the dog, so I would jump in the brush piles and then he would actually kill the rabbits. But, those meals were really important to me. The rabbit stew was some of my favorite, and going fishing. And, there was just this real meaning that came through hunting and fishing as a way to eat for me. And it was also just that kind of direct connection with the creator that I experienced. I spent a lot of time as a kid alone, or what a lot of modern humans think of as alone. But I never felt that way. I was out catching bullfrogs and going fishing and exploring and climbing trees and learning about the world, about creation, about the love of God. And so, I had plenty of other friends or acquaintances who also were into hunting or fishing. And what I found is that at the end of the day, I had some core differences. There's in some of the hunting and fishing cultures, there's a value of in some way, of violence. And I do not value that. I think that the way that we eat, eating is kind of an act of violence. At the base, we have to eat life in order to survive. And that's just how the world works. But I think there are lots of great cultures that do really value the life of our food. And that happens definitely in indigenous communities and farming communities and in rooftop gardening in the middle of New York City kind of communities. And I think that this expression, this time where I'm paying attention to the silence that I caused by taking this animal's life and paying close individual attention to the actual animal, it's a practice, I guess, of humility. It's a practice of recognizing that you or I, we all only have one life. And, that kind of deeper cross species value of life. And so I'm there valuing the life of this animal.
I like to say that my family was fairly poor, and we also depended on hunting to supplement the food budget. And I would say that while I understood the pragmatic need for what we were doing, hunting deer in particular, I think I was maybe reacting against the, I don't know, meaninglessness of it, if I can say it that way. It didn't make sense to me on a values level. And so, once we stopped hunting, I never personally went back to it. I guess I probably have some unspoken bias about hunting, And so, but I have to say that listening to or reading your essay and reading it with the sensibility that you build into it, and its sensibility around those two words, sorry and thanks, that really, really caused me to think differently about hunting and the possibilities of hunting and what hunting can do in terms even of our understanding and knowing place. So, how do you explain that tension there that is at the intersection of sorry and thanks, those two just key words in your essay?
Yeah, sorry and thanks. I think that there is just, it's inevitable that we cause death by existing. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of us. It's kind of like, I wish that wasn't the case. And thank you, just that basic gratitude. I think that, you probably can think of many different very special meals that you've had where you got that full sense of, oh, I have most of the picture of what went into this. Something maybe you've grown or something that you've hunted or fished for or foraged or, those kinds of stories where we can kind of close the loop and we can see that vibrant animal, that wild animal that is healthy and that like here is the moment where I'm sorry that you had to die in order for me to eat you and my family and friends and others. And that, yeah, that thanks, that gratitude, I think that, that kind of positioning or that kind of posture is the best that we can be as humans when we're living a life that is, deeply grateful. And obviously, we all have moments where we're not there. But what I've found is that through, this kind of intimate practice of hunting for food, I find moments where I can access that, which comes with the loss of life.
It seems to me that when you talk about thanks, it might be a fundamentally different sort of thanks, perhaps, than what most people are used to giving for their food. Maybe we'll thank God or sort of give a general expression of gratitude for what we have. But in this case, you're thanking the buck. You're saying thanks to that being. And to me, that speaks of some underlying values of respect for this other creature, but even of relationship in the sense that you are not attributing personhood necessarily, but beinghood, right? Like you're acknowledging them as another living being and all that's beautiful about that. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is true. And yeah, you're a very perceptive reader to pick that up. That is absolutely how I see the natural world, whether it's, an ant all the way through a fungus. It doesn't matter what life form. I do believe in the beingness and that life force that is not unique to humans. And I think that, I think that, but it's mostly a sense of feeling. It's a sense of, being close enough to feel the intelligence that is there and also the difference. And it's like, so for me in that kind of practice, like you said, I'm not saying you're a person, but I am respecting the difference. I'm respecting the difference by communicating. I understand quite a bit about how deer communicate with each other, but I could never say that I could speak to the deer in a way that is uniquely deer. So, as human, saying thank you, yeah, is definitely a type of, I think, respect that we can pay to humans, we can pay to non humans on all different levels of what we call consciousness. And I guess at the end of the day, I'm not sure what to say in kind of that metaphysical sense of how things work, but I do know that it resonates kind of from an internal place to say, like, it kind of changes our lives to have that gratitude, to have that respect. And I see it not only playing out with the approach of a deer, but also the approach of others, humans and non, on the planet.
So I appreciate the fact that you struggle to give words to some of this stuff that's more numinous and unexplainable, right? I mean, I totally agree. I understand what you mean when really at best, we can call it a feeling. Like we're perceiving, we're processing, we're connecting on a level that's not necessarily intellectual. I will ask the question though, you're a scientist, and here you are talking about sort of metaphysical ideas, concepts, and it's not scientific language. I'm wondering how you would describe your existence at that intersection of art and science. Like for you, it seems really critical that both are in balance. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I have definitely been put in the science camp by, I understand everybody needs to be sort of defined, but I think that, in terms of the actual relationship, the actual kind of mixture of all the things that are going on when we're in the landscape, when we're out on the water, in the woods, in different places, that the language of poetry works as well as anything to describe what's actually happening. And so I've always had that deep interest in life on the planet and biodiversity, and that interest in experience. I have stories of letting a snapping turtle bite my finger because I just couldn't shake the curiosity, like, well, my dad told me it'll bite my finger off, but this is a little one and I have to experience that. So I think that the the intersection between sort of natural history and the poetic traditions and the spiritual traditions, that's something that's always shifting. That's something that's always changing for me. But yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about it, except for that the language of poetry and the sort of actual bodily experience of presence in those moments are really powerful.
Well, in essence, you're speaking about different kinds of knowing, right? And you're advocating for multiple kinds of knowing.
Yes.
Too often we might stop short at the scientific level. If we know the Latin names, then we know this thing. Or maybe we commodify nature and we know everything as product. It either helps us or stands in our way, right? Which, of course, is a really destructive mindset in Western culture, at least. But I do, again, appreciate the difficulty of trying to explain this just because it is maybe language that as a culture we're not so used to speaking, right? And you're advocating for that.
Yeah, and I think it is a language of spirit at the end of the day, that there is this kind of spiritual movement that's happening that is all types of metaphysical.
Funny when you mentioned the snapping turtle, I think of my daughter, and she was probably 8 years old. We were walking in the woods. I kept saying, "Oh, watch out, stinging nettles, move aside," right? So we'd be dodging these. And finally she just turned to me and said, "Why are you calling them stinging nettles?" I said, "Well, they'll sting you." "What does it feel like?" "Well, it stings." And she goes, "What if I touched it right now?" I said, "What if you did?" And so she thought about it, and she really wanted to know this plant in terms of, its plantness beyond its name. So she took a big old fistful of stinging nettle and, then snapped her hand away. And sure enough, the rest of the day she was stinging. But for her, that was worth it. In fact, in some ways, those early experiences of experiential learning and experiential encounter really set the tone for much of her life. That is a lot of her attitude toward life, is she needs to know on more than a head level.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of kids, you have kids. You have 2 daughters.
I do.
One of them figures prominently in this essay. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't read the rest of the essay to us, and then we can talk about that.
Sure. I think my 7-year-old daughter Emerson, who suggested that I hunt this morning, will want to be part of the rest of the process, so I walk home. From the woods, I see her eating cereal in a kitchen chair she pulled in front of the wood stove. I open the sliding glass door and lean inside. "You got a deer, didn't you?" Emerson asks with confidence. She told me last night when I tucked her in that it would be so. "He's beautiful. Would you like to help?" She runs upstairs to get dressed. We walk out the back door. At the threshold of the forest, the wind swirls and casts beaded snow across frozen leaves. Emerson throws her arms in the air in response. We hear something else in the sheen of sound. Chins to the sky, we search for the troops of sandhill cranes who speak to each other above the piebald clouds. We steep in this scene, then continue along the path. When Emerson sees the deer, she jogs to him, pets his back, and runs one of his ears through her fingers. I give her some time, and then I ask where she thinks we should take the deer to remove the organs from his body. She looks to the eastern sky. "Right over there by the fairy pond," she points rhythmically, "because there's an open spot where the turkey vultures will be able to see the parts we won't eat." She appears to be thinking something over. "Will we get to see his lungs?" I assure her that we will, and I affirm her thoughtfulness about the birds. Emerson, who is about 2/3 the size of the deer, grasps a back leg just above the hoof while I hold the other. We drag the deer 100 yards or so and stop for a break at the top of a rise. She picks at the edge of his hoof with her thumbnail. "I'd really like to keep these hooves in my room, if that's okay." When we reach the place Emerson has chosen, I make sure the buck's belly is pointed slightly downslope to have gravity work with us. I explain how and where to split the skin just below the sternum, by reference to mine. I split the hide with the tip of my knife blade and make a small slit into the animal's muscle. "Would you like to help me?" Emerson nudges closer and takes the handle of the knife. I guide her hand as we cut slowly most of the way to his hind legs. I ask Emerson to hold up the 2 legs on his left side so I can sever the diaphragm and some of the connective tissue holding in the deer's organs. "Can I feel inside there before we take the parts out?" she asks. I pull the rib cage open as wide as I can, loosing a cloud of steam. She peers inside and threads her hand into the mystery. I hear the movement of her palpating fingers. She removes her hand from the deer's body, looks closely at the blood on her fingers for a moment, and wipes it on her fleece. I make a few more cuts, reach into his rib cage all the way back to the spine, and roll the organs out onto the ground in one bundle. We talk through the many parts, giving language to this sacred geography. We are wrapped in awe of the form, texture, and color of this inner landscape. "Papa, I know that people think dead things are gross, but they're not really seeing them. Do you see how this liver is purple, lined with red? It feels so smooth. Do you think most people know that?" "I think you have a very powerful way of seeing, Emerson." She reaches for the heart. I remove it from the pericardium, the sac-like structure that surrounds the muscle. We huddle close, kneel down together, and notice the white, purple, gray, crimson, teal, black, red, and blue. She traces the arteries with her fingertip, the same way she attends to the forms of columbines, turns the heart over in her hand, and gasps. After some time, she whispers, "Are our hearts beautiful like this?" All I can do is nod. The west wind rolls wood smoke down the path. Emerson shivers and glances back toward the house. I need to draw a picture of this. She runs home with the deer heart in her hands while I half yell garbled instructions about where not to put it down inside the house. I lie down on my back for a time, then finish my work. On my way past the house, I glance through the sliding glass door. The heart is on a white plate in the center of the table. That afternoon, Emerson and I examine the heart's form. I pull out a topographic map to show her how the arteries flow in riverine patterns like water on Earth. We feel inside the ventricles where blood pumped through. I slice the heart into cubes, simmer with olive oil, Vidalia onion, garlic, and pink mineral salt. We savor the gift. Once the buck is skinned and the meat is wrapped for the freezer, Emerson pulls the rest of him on a tarp to the edge of the field south of the house. I walk with her. Let's put him under the mulberry tree. It's a pretty place, she says. And we can see who comes to eat what's left from the window, I add. She stretches the hide back over the rib cage and arranges the leg bones as they once were. She touches his nose and looks into his eyes. Thanks for your meat, Buck.
I sensed in the writing, and perhaps even in the reading, that there were maybe moments of speechlessness.
Definitely.
I suspect that when you see certain values, certain ways of being emerging in your children, it can be overwhelming like that. Overwhelming in many ways, but perhaps I would be overwhelmed with gratitude, for example, to see that this is the kind of person that she's becoming. How did she get to this place where she's able to make those observations? And then what are your hopes for her future as well?
So Emerson has been outside in wild landscapes with me for her whole life. And she is a highly sensitive person who has just incredible observation abilities. And so I remember when she was 9 months old, I was bow hunting elk with her in a backpack, and she was in the herds and she would make elk sounds. And so she has, even before it's possible that she remembers, this is kind of like the background and part of her life. One of the things, I mean, like I had to compose myself to read this. And especially this line, like our heart's beautiful, like this, it's just such a deep pleasure to be with a person who sees so clearly in the context of our modern society, where humans don't even know anymore that, like, hey, my heart physically beats just like a deer's heart. Look at what we're seeing. Look at what we're capable of seeing if we open our eyes. And so I just think that this is a real potential in human nature, especially among the healers, especially among the teachers, among the poets again. And I see all of those things in Emerson. She's 10 now and continues, she'll run outside to go forage up a salad from the yard and has this way of knowing the natural world very deeply, and then also paying attention to those people who are around also deeply.
I'm wondering if this ethos that you have about raising children, does it transfer to your work with college-age students and graduate students?
It does, I think. I mean, as a humanist, I believe in people and their abilities, and like even kind of eyes wide open to the ways that like we all take shortcuts here and there where we need to, or where it's just the easiest path. I think that I guess just the possibility of wonder and curiosity, and also the human ability to learn how to slow down and how to pay attention, how to pay attention to, the everyday world, the others that are in the grocery store and your yard and the biodiversity that could be there. Everything from that to, the tracks that are by the river that you could learn how to follow, or the bird song that you could learn how to identify. I do very deeply believe in the students that I work with, that they have this sort of innate desire to open their eyes and to see it. And it's hard to do, it's just like the great naturalist Aldo Leopold wrote that we, as ecologically conscious people, we live in a world of wounds. And I think that's true. And I think that all of us, as humans, like we're wounded as well. But then when we can open our eyes and open ourselves to, some of these deeper experiences, that we tend to find that we have more capacity than we knew was there.
I would imagine that in some ways you teach against resistance. And I'm thinking maybe specifically about, on the one hand, so many of the sort of current young generation tends to struggle with climate despair, really feeling hopeless, like there's actually nothing they can do. At the same time, many students, I'm sure, will be going back home to cultures which are very resistant to the idea that climate change is real and that there's things that we can do about it. Do you find it a struggle to help them to have hope? And maybe even more important, do you find it hard to convince them that they can actually do something, that there's agency?
Yeah, these are great questions. And one of the things that I talk about with my students often is this idea of scale. And so I think one of the things that adds to despair is that we try to make the individual scale into the universal. And so, no, individually not going to move the planetary scale of the climate crisis. I think that there is a lot of reason for despair, and it's going to be stark, but just having the sense of vulnerability that it takes to say, I'm going to work at my own individual level and I'm going to do something about this. And I know that it's not going to solve it, but I know that I can do something, and I can surround myself with people who are also going to do something. And I can invite people who weren't going to do something into this. And it doesn't have to mean that their way looks like my way, but it does mean that you get kind of that collective resonance and it takes the edge off of the despair. I think that in the time that's coming, we need to know how to make joy in our own lives and how to bring joy into moments of real destruction and loss. And I think that that's another thing that can be taught, like, hey, yeah, this is a major thing. It doesn't matter if you spend every waking moment of your life trying to solve it. What we really need to do is like take a break sometimes, get some rest, develop the ability to sleep well at night.
Well, to circle back around it, it strikes me that this idea of developing the capacity to build a relationship with place has everything to do with what you're talking about. Because if we can focus not just on our individual capacity, but even on our individual place, it puts boundaries around the problems, right? It puts some parameters around the setting that we're working in so that maybe we don't have to be overwhelmed and thinking about the whole world, but maybe our responsibility is to this place at this time, to love that place, protect it, care for it, relate to it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's incredibly well said. And it's true, too, that, some of these things that we don't think of as the most concrete, like walking out and really looking at the irises that just blossomed, really just taking a minute to have that love, to do that thing that shows the respect and shows the love and holds on to that capacity to have joy in the things that are alive.
If you want to read Joel's essay called Hearts Like This, or to learn more about his teaching, you'll find links in this episode's show notes on the Earth Keepers podcast website. If you appreciate this podcast and want to help us expand its global reach, please show your support by subscribing. Just go to whatever platform you listen to podcasts on and hit the subscribe or follow button for the Earth Keepers podcast. I'm Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Wolfers. Timothy Connor is our editor, and Forrest Reed is the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.